The rain fell in sheets across Guadalcanal's jungle, turning the ground into thick mud that sucked at every boot step. Sergeant James Fletcher pressed his back against a fallen tree, feeling the rough bark dig through his soaked uniform. In his hands, the M1 Garand rifle felt heavy and unfamiliar. He had only received it 3 weeks ago, replacing his old Springfield bolt-action. The weapon was supposed to be better, faster, more deadly. But right now, pinned down by invisible Japanese soldiers, it felt like just another piece of metal that could not save them. "Sergeant, I can't see them anywhere," whispered Private Danny Chun from behind a thick palm tree. His voice shook slightly. Chun was only 19, fresh from San Francisco, and this was his first real firefight. Fletcher had tried to keep him safe, but the jungle made no promises to anyone. Another crack echoed through the trees. The bullet hit the log inches from Fletcher's head, sending splinters flying. He counted in his mind. That was the 5th shot in the last 2 minutes. The Japanese were using Type 38 Arisaka rifles, bolt-action weapons that required manual reloading after each shot. They were accurate, deadly accurate. The Imperial Japanese Army trained its soldiers to make every bullet count. 1 shot, 1 kill. That was their philosophy. Fletcher's squad had learned this the hard way over the past month. The Japanese soldiers were masters of concealment, hiding in the dense jungle like ghosts. They would fire once, maybe twice, then disappear before anyone could return fire. American soldiers died without ever seeing who killed them. It was a terrifying way to fight. "Chun, can you hear anything on the radio?" Fletcher called out, keeping his voice low. Chun had a special job in the squad. His parents had come from China, and he spoke some Japanese. Not perfect, but enough to understand enemy radio chatter when they got lucky enough to intercept it. Chun pressed the radio receiver closer to his ear, listening through the static. His eyes widened. "Sergeant, they're talking about us. They say we waste ammunition. They call us cowards who spray bullets without aiming. They think we're afraid to fight properly." Fletcher felt anger rise in his chest, but he pushed it down. The Japanese soldiers were not wrong, exactly. American troops did fire more bullets than their enemy. The M1 Garand held 8 rounds in its clip and could fire them all in seconds without reloading. It was semi-automatic, meaning each trigger pull-fired 1 bullet automatically, with no need to work a bolt. Japanese soldiers had to manually pull their bolt back, eject the spent cartridge, push the bolt forward to chamber a new round, and then aim again. It took time, precious seconds in combat. But firing more bullets did not matter if you could not see the enemy. The jungle swallowed sound and sight. Leaves as big as dinner plates blocked the sun. Vines hung like curtains. A man could hide 3 feet away and remain invisible. The Japanese used this to their advantage. They moved like shadows, took their careful shots, and vanished. "Martinez is hit," someone shouted from the left. Corporal Juan Martinez had been Fletcher's friend since training camp. They had survived the landing on Guadalcanal together, shared rations when supplies ran low, kept each other awake during night watches. Fletcher's heart hammered in his chest as he crawled through the mud toward Martinez's position. Martinez lay on his back, eyes staring at nothing. A single bullet hole marked his forehead. 1 shot, perfectly placed. The Japanese sniper had done his job and disappeared. Fletcher felt something break inside him. They had better weapons, more ammunition, and support from the most powerful nation on Earth. Yet they were dying in this miserable jungle, killed by an enemy they rarely saw. "Sergeant, what do we do?" asked Private Wilson, his face pale with fear. The rest of the squad looked at Fletcher, waiting for orders. They were pinned down, taking fire from unknown positions, unable to advance or retreat safely. This was the reality of war in the Pacific. American industry had given them superior weapons, but the jungle equalized everything. Fletcher thought about the M1 Garand in his hands. General Douglas MacArthur himself had called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. The general was not a man who gave praise lightly. There had to be a reason. The rifle could fire 8 shots rapidly. It was reliable, even in the rain and mud. It made a distinctive ping sound when the empty clip ejected. Japanese soldiers had learned to listen for that ping, timing their attacks for when Americans reloaded, but maybe they was thinking about it wrong. Maybe the advantage was not in the rifle itself, but in how they used it. The Japanese fought with discipline and precision. Each shot was aimed, calculated, meant to kill. American soldiers had been taught the same way with their old bolt actions. But the M1 Garand was different. It could keep firing, keep an enemy's head down, make them afraid to move or shoot back. "Chun, get everyone's attention," Fletcher said quietly. "Tomorrow morning, we're going to change how we fight. No more hiding and hoping. We're going to use these rifles the way they were meant to be used." Chun nodded, not fully understanding, but trusting his sergeant. He passed the word to the others. Fletcher looked down at Martinez's body one more time. His friend had died fighting the old way, trying to spot a hidden enemy for a perfect shot. Tomorrow, they would fight a new way. The M1 Garand was not just a faster rifle. It was a different philosophy of combat. Fletcher was beginning to understand that the Japanese had no answer for what was coming. As darkness fell over the jungle, the rain finally stopped. Somewhere in the trees, a Japanese soldier chambered another round in his Arisaka rifle. The night belonged to them, for now. But tomorrow, Fletcher thought, tomorrow would belong to thunder. Dawn broke slowly over Guadalcanal, the sun rising red through morning mist. Fletcher had not slept. He spent the night planning, thinking about every firefight his squad had survived, every friend they had lost. The M1 Garand lay across his lap, and he ran his fingers over its metal surface. 8 rounds, semi-automatic, faster than anything the Japanese carried. The advantage was there. He just had to use it correctly. "Listen up," Fletcher said as his squad gathered in the gray morning light. 9 men looked back at him, tired and scared but still willing to fight. "We've been fighting their war, playing their game. They hide, take one perfect shot, and disappear. We try to do the same thing. But that's not what these rifles were made for." Private Chun translated quietly for himself, making sure he understood every word. The others watched Fletcher closely. They had lost 3 men in the past week alone. Everyone wanted to know what would change. "From now on, we fight in pairs," Fletcher continued. "One man fires, the other moves. The man firing doesn't need to hit anything. He just needs to keep shooting, keep those Japanese heads down. While they're hiding from bullets, his partner flanks to a better position. Then they switch. Keep moving, keep firing. Never give them time to aim their careful shots." Wilson raised his hand slightly. "But Sergeant, won't we run out of ammunition doing that?" Fletcher shook his head. "The supply ships bring us more bullets than we can carry. The Japanese don't have that. Every bullet they fire has to count because they might not get more for weeks. We can afford to suppress. They can't afford to waste shots. That's our advantage." The squad looked uncertain, but they trusted Fletcher. He had kept them alive this long. If he said this would work, they would try it. They moved out an hour later, heading toward a river crossing where Japanese patrols had been spotted. The morning was hot already, humidity making the air thick and hard to breathe. Insects swarmed around them, but Fletcher barely noticed. His mind was focused on the coming fight. Chin heard them first. He raised his fist to signal to stop. Everyone froze. Through the jungle, sounds of birds and insects, there were other noises. The clink of metal on metal. The soft rustle of movement. Japanese soldiers close by. Fletcher estimated maybe a dozen, moving parallel to the river. His heart began to pound, but his hand stayed steady. He pointed at Chun and Wilson, then pointed left. He pointed at 2 others, signaled right. He would go straight forward with the rest. 3 groups, each with men carrying M1 Garands. The trap was set. Now came the test. Fletcher did not try to sneak closer. Instead, he stood up and started firing. The M1 Garand barked rapidly, 8 shots in 4 seconds. He was not aiming at specific targets. He was aiming at the area where the Japanese were. While he fired, Wilson and Chin ran left, moving fast and low. The other pair went right. The Japanese did exactly what Fletcher expected. They hit the ground, seeking cover, unable to shoot back while bullets flew over their heads. The moment Fletcher's rifle made its distinctive ping as the empty clip ejected, Chin opened fire from the left. 8 more shots raking through the Japanese position from a new angle. While Chun fired, Fletcher reloaded, sliding a fresh clip into his Garand. The metal clip clicked into place with a satisfying sound. He was ready to fire again in seconds. Now the Japanese soldiers were confused. They had trained for individual rifle duels, careful shots traded back and forth. This was different. This was continuous fire from multiple directions. They tried to return fire, but every time one of them raised his Arisaka rifle to aim, American bullets forced him back down. Wilson was moving again, getting even closer while Chin covered him. The two men on the right were doing the same thing, working together like a machine. The Japanese soldiers were brave. Fletcher had to give them that. Even surrounded and outgunned, they tried to fight, but their bolt-action rifles could not keep up. By the time one soldier worked his bolt to chamber a new round, 3 or 4 American bullets had already answered. The firefight lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, the jungle was quiet again except for the sound of men breathing hard and reloading their rifles. Fletcher counted 5 dead Japanese soldiers. The rest had retreated, something he rarely saw them do. Usually they fought to the death. But this time, they had faced something they could not counter with skill or courage alone. Chun, check their radio if they have one, Fletcher ordered. While the young soldier searched the bodies, Fletcher examined one of the Arisaka rifles. It was a beautiful weapon, well-made and accurate. The wood stock was smooth, the metal parts precisely fitted. You could tell Japanese craftsmen took pride in making these rifles. Each one was almost a work of art. But art did not win firefights. Speed did. Volume of fire did. Sergeant, I found a notebook, Chun said, holding up a small book with Japanese writing. It looks like a diary or a log. Should I try to read it? Later, Fletcher said. Right now, we need to keep moving. But yes, see what it says. Maybe we can learn something. As the squad moved through the jungle, Fletcher noticed something different in how the men walked. They had won, not by luck or by surprise, but by using better tactics with better weapons. The M1 Garand was proving itself, not as a magical solution, but as a tool that allowed new ways of fighting. The Japanese had perfected the art of the rifle duel, one careful shot against another. But the Americans were fighting a different kind of war. Industrial war. Modern war. War where manufacturing and supply lines mattered as much as courage. That night, Chin read from the capture diary by firelight. The Japanese soldier had written about fighting Americans with endless bullets and rifles that never stop. He had written about fear, about how his training did not prepare him for enemies who could fire 8 times before he could fire twice. Fletcher listened and understood. They were winning not because they were better soldiers, but because they had better tools for this new kind of warfare. The question was whether the Japanese could adapt before more men died on both sides. 3 weeks after their first successful engagement, Fletcher's squad had become known as Ghosts Who Brought Thunder. They moved through the jungle using the new tactics, always firing, always moving, never giving the enemy time to respond. Other American units heard about their success and started copying the approach. The M1 Garand was changing how the war was fought, one firefight at a time. But the Japanese were not fools. They learned, adapted, and planned. Fletcher knew a major attack was coming. Chun had intercepted radio messages that spoke of a final push and breaking the American line. The Imperial Japanese Army was gathering forces for a massive night assault. Night fighting was their specialty. In darkness, American firepower advantages meant less. Fear and confusion took over. Many American soldiers dreaded the night more than anything else. The attack came on a moonless night when the jungle was pitch black. Fletcher's squad was dug in along a ridge that overlooked a small valley. They had sandbags stacked, clear lines of fire during daytime, and plenty of ammunition. But at midnight, when the Japanese came, none of that seemed to matter anymore. The first sign was sound. A strange yelling, half words and half screams, echoing through the darkness. Banzai charges were legendary and terrifying. Japanese soldiers would attack in waves, running straight at enemy positions with bayonets fixed, willing to die rather than retreat. The sound grew louder, closer. Fletcher's hands tightened on his M1 Garand. He could not see anything in the darkness. but he could hear them coming. Fire at the sounds. Fletcher shouted, "Keep those rifles going." The night exploded with muzzle flashes. Every time someone fired, the flash lit up the jungle for a split second, showing shadows and movement everywhere. The M1 Garands roared continuously, their semi-automatic action letting soldiers fire as fast as they could pull triggers. The distinctive ping of empty clips ejecting mixed with screams and explosions. Chaos ruled the darkness. Fletcher fired at shapes, at shadows, at anything that moved. He had no idea if he was hitting targets. Reload. Fire 8 shots. Listen for the ping. Reload again. His hands worked automatically, muscle memory from weeks of practice. Beside him, Chun was firing too, his face set in concentration despite the fear in his eyes. The young soldier had grown up fast in the jungle. The Japanese kept coming. Their Arisaka rifles cracked in the night, slower than the Garands, but still deadly. A bullet hit the sandbag near Fletcher's head, spraying dirt into his face. Another hit Wilson in the shoulder, and the private fell back screaming. But the line held. The sheer volume of American fire created a wall of lead that Japanese soldiers had to run through. Many did not make it. Hours passed like minutes. Fletcher lost track of time in the darkness and noise. His rifle barrel grew hot from continuous firing. His ears rang from the explosions. Twice, Japanese soldiers made it to the American positions, and fighting turned to desperate close combat with rifles used as clubs and bayonets as knives. The M1 Garand's weight and solid construction made it an effective weapon even when not firing bullets. Somewhere out in the darkness, a Japanese sergeant named Tanaka led his men forward into the American guns. He had fought in China, trained for years in the art of warfare, and believed in the emperor and the code of Bushido with all his heart. But tonight, leading his soldiers into American fire, he felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt. His men were dying before they could get close enough to use their bayonets. The American rifles never stopped firing. Even in darkness, even in chaos, the wall of bullets continued. Tanaka worked his bolt-action Arisaka rifle, chambered a new round, aimed at a muzzle flash, and fired. Then he had to work the bolt again, eject the spent cartridge, chamber another round. By the time he was ready to fire again, the Americans had fired 5 or 6 more times. It was not a fair fight, but Tanaka knew war was never fair. Still, this felt less like combat and more like running into a machine. Dawn finally came, gray and misty. The firing gradually stopped as Japanese forces pulled back. Fletcher stood up slowly, his legs shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. The valley below was covered with bodies. Too many bodies. Japanese soldiers had fought with incredible courage, charging into certain death because their orders and honor demanded it. But courage alone could not overcome the simple mathematics of firepower. One M1 Garand could fire as fast as 3 or 4 bolt-action rifles. Multiply that across a whole squad, a whole company, and the advantage became overwhelming. "Chin, you alive?" Fletcher called out hoarsely. His throat was raw from shouting orders all night. "Still here, Sergeant," Chin answered from nearby. His face was covered in dirt and dried blood from a cut on his forehead, but he was alive. "I heard some radio chatter before dawn. The Japanese are pulling back. Their offensive failed." Fletcher walked slowly along the defensive line, checking on his men. Wilson was being treated by a medic, his shoulder bandaged. 2 others had minor wounds. But everyone was alive. They had held. Around them, other American positions reported similar stories. The Japanese attack had been broken not by superior tactics or better training, but by industrial firepower. The M1 Garand had proved itself in the worst conditions possible. As the morning light grew stronger, Fletcher saw a figure moving among the Japanese bodies in the valley. A soldier, wounded but alive, trying to crawl to safety. Fletcher raised his rifle automatically, then lowered it. The man was no threat. He picked up a canteen and walked down into the valley. The wounded Japanese soldier was a sergeant, his uniform marked with rank insignia. His eyes widened when Fletcher approached, expecting death. Instead, Fletcher offered him water. The Japanese sergeant, Tanaka, took it with shaking hands and drank. Their eyes met, two soldiers who had spent the night trying to kill each other, now sharing water in the morning light. Tanaka said something in Japanese. Fletcher did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. They were both just men, doing their duty, caught in something bigger than either of them. The M1 Garand had won this battle, but the human cost was visible everywhere on both sides. 2 weeks after the failed Japanese offensive, Fletcher's squad pushed deeper into enemy-held territory. The jungle had become quieter. Japanese resistance was fading as their supply lines collapsed and reinforcements stopped coming. American forces were winning, slowly but surely. Yet Fletcher found no joy in victory. He had seen too many bodies, both American and Japanese, to celebrate. They found the abandoned camp around noon. It sat in a small clearing, hidden under thick jungle canopy. The Japanese had left in a hurry. Tents still stood, equipment lay scattered, and papers fluttered in the breeze. Chun immediately began gathering documents while Fletcher and the others secured the perimeter. The young translator had become invaluable, his ability to read Japanese giving them insight into enemy plans and thoughts. "Sergeant, you need to see this," Chun said quietly, holding a small notebook. "It's a diary. Personal writings from a Japanese sergeant. His name was Tanaka." Fletcher took the diary carefully. The pages were filled with neat Japanese characters. "Can you read it to me?" Chun nodded and began translating. The first entries were from months earlier, before the war came to Guadalcanal. Tanaka wrote about his life in Osaka, his wife and 2 children, his job as a school teacher. He had been conscripted, called to serve as emperor. The diary showed a man who loved his country but missed his family deeply. He was not so different from American soldiers who carried photos of loved ones and dreamed of home. As Chun read, Fletcher sat down on a fallen log. The diary entries showed Tanaka's experience of the war. He wrote about training with the Arisaka rifle, learning to shoot with precision and discipline. The Imperial Japanese Army taught that every bullet was precious, every shot must be aimed and true. Tanaka took pride in his marksmanship, scoring high in qualification tests. He believed in the warrior code of Bushido, in honor and duty above all else. Then came the entries about fighting Americans. Tanaka's writing changed, became frustrated and confused. He described firefights where his men could not return fire effectively because American bullets never stopped coming. He wrote about soldiers dying before they could work their rifle bolts to chamber a second round. He questioned why the Americans had such weapons while Japanese troops made do with rifles designed decades earlier. But he never questioned his duty. He would fight, and if necessary, die with honor. "This entry is from 2 weeks ago," Chun said softly. "The night of the big attack." Tanaka had written about leading his men into American positions in the darkness. He described the continuous muzzle flashes, the never-ending sound of gunfire, the screams of his soldiers falling around him. He wrote about his best friend, Lieutenant Yamamoto, being cut down by American fire just meters from their objective. Tanaka blamed himself for not being able to protect his men. He blamed the American rifles that fired so fast his soldiers could not respond. He blamed the war itself. The last entry was written at dawn after the attack failed. Tanaka wrote about being wounded, about crawling away from the battle, about accepting water from an American sergeant who could have killed him. He wrote that the Americans did not fight like warriors, they fought like a machine. But he also wrote that perhaps the age of warriors was ending, replaced by the age of factories and mass production. His final words were simple and sad. "I do not know if I will see home again. If these words are found, please tell my family I did my duty." Fletcher felt something heavy in his chest. This was the enemy, the man whose soldiers had tried to kill him and his squad. Yet reading these words, Tanaka seemed less like an enemy and more like a mirror. Both of them were sergeants trying to keep their men alive. Both loved their countries and missed their homes. Both were caught in a war neither had started. "Sergeant, I'm picking up something on the radio," another soldier called out. Chun hurried over to listen. After a moment, he returned to Fletcher with an excited expression. We captured several wounded Japanese soldiers at an aid station 5 miles south. The medics are treating them. One of them is a sergeant named Tanaka. Fletcher stood up, still holding the diary. Can we get there today? If we move fast, yes. The squad made good time through the jungle, and by late afternoon, they reached the temporary aid station. American medics were treating wounded from both sides, a practice that often surprised Japanese soldiers who expected to be executed. Fletcher asked to see Sergeant Tanaka. A medic led him to a cot where a Japanese soldier lay with bandages around his chest and arm. Tanaka's eyes widened when Fletcher approached. Recognition passed between them. This was the American sergeant who had given him water after the battle. Fletcher held out the diary. Through Chin's translation, he explained how they found it at the abandoned camp. Tanaka took the diary with his good hand, tears suddenly flowing down his face. He spoke rapidly in Japanese, and Chin translated. He says he thought these words would never reach his family. He thanks you for returning them. He asks why you would do this for an enemy. Fletcher thought about how to answer. Finally, he said, because we're both just soldiers doing our jobs. This war isn't personal. Your rifle, my rifle, they're just tools. We're the ones who have to live with what we do with them. Tanaka listened to the translation and nodded slowly. He spoke again, and Chin translated. He says the M1 Garand is a weapon for a different kind of war. His training taught him to fight as an individual warrior, one careful shot at a time. Your rifle represents fighting as a team, as a nation's industrial power. He says he understands now why Japan is losing. Not because Japanese soldiers lack courage, but because the war has changed into something his country cannot match. The two sergeants sat in silence for a moment, understanding passing between them without words. Then Tanaka spoke one more time. Chin's voice was soft as he translated the final words. In another life, we might have been friends. Fletcher nodded. Yeah, we might have been. September 1945. The war was over. Japan had surrendered after atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, after years of fighting across the Pacific, after millions of lives were lost on both sides. Fletcher stood in the ruins of Tokyo as part of the occupation forces, his M1 Garand still slung over his shoulder. The rifle was scratched and worn, the wood stock darkened by years of sweat and jungle humidity, but still worked perfectly. It had carried him through Guadalcanal, through countless other battles, and now it accompanied him in peace. The city around him was devastated. American bombers had turned Tokyo into a wasteland of rubble and ash. Survivors lived in makeshift shelters, struggling to find food and rebuild their lives. Fletcher walked through the streets, feeling strange. For years, these people had been the enemy. Now they were just people, defeated and trying to survive. Women carried water in buckets. Children played in the ruins. Old men cleared debris with bare hands. War was over, but suffering continued. Sergeant Fletcher, a familiar voice called out. Fletcher turned to see Danny Chun walking toward him, now wearing a translator's armband. Chun had survived the war, and his language skills made him valuable for the occupation. He had grown from a scared 19-year-old into a confident young man, though his eyes still carried shadows from what he had seen. Chun, good to see you, Fletcher said, shaking his hand. How are you holding up? Better than most, Chun replied. I've been working with the Occupation Administration, helping translate for civilians who need assistance. Actually, that's why I'm here. I found someone you might want to meet. Fletcher raised an eyebrow. Who? Sergeant Tanaka. He survived his wounds, made it back to Osaka. I've been helping track down former soldiers for reconciliation programs. When I found his name in the records, I thought you should know. Fletcher felt his heart beat faster. Tanaka, the Japanese sergeant whose diary they had found, who they had met briefly at the aid station. The man who represented everything Fletcher had fought against, yet somehow understood on a deeper level. Is he well? Chin's expression darkened. He's alive, but his family, his home was destroyed in the firebombing. His wife survived, but his children didn't. He's living in what's left of his neighborhood, helping rebuild. The next day, Fletcher and Chun traveled to Osaka. The city was in even worse condition than Tokyo. The American firebombing campaign of March 1945 had turned entire neighborhoods into ash. Fletcher felt sick looking at it. He had been part of this war machine that brought such destruction. Yes, Japan had started the war with the attack on Pearl Harbor. Yes, Japanese forces had committed terrible atrocities across Asia. But looking at the ruins and the survivors, Fletcher struggled with what victory meant. They found Tanaka working with a group of men clearing rubble from what had once been a school. He was thinner than Fletcher remembered, his face lined with grief and exhaustion. When Shin called out his name, Tanaka turned and froze. Recognition lit his eyes. He spoke quickly in Japanese. He says he never expected to see you again. Chun translated. He asked what you're doing here. Fletcher stepped forward. I wanted to know if you made it home. I wanted to see you in peace instead of war. They walked to what remained of Tanaka's house. One wall still stood, providing minimal shelter. Tanaka's wife served them tea with quiet dignity, though Fletcher knew they had little to spare. Through Chen's translation, they talked. Tanaka spoke about the end of the war, about surviving his wounds in an overcrowded military hospital, about making the long journey home only to find his children gone. His voice was steady, but his eyes told the story of a man who had lost everything that mattered. I still have my rifle, Tanaka said, gesturing to a corner where an Arisaka rifle leaned against the wall. And I still have the diary you returned to me. These are the only things that survived from before. Fletcher unslung his M1 Garand and held it carefully. I've been carrying this since Guadalcanal. It's the weapon that probably saved my life 100 times. General MacArthur called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. It is a fine weapon, Tanaka said through Chun. Fast, reliable, effective. It represented your country's strength, your industrial power. My Arisaka was made with skill and care, but it was designed for a different kind of war. A warrior's war, where individual skill mattered most. Fletcher looked at both rifles, sitting side by side now in this ruined house. One represented craftsmanship and tradition. The other represented mass production and modern warfare. Both had killed. Both had protected. Neither had prevented the terrible cost of war itself. The M1 helped end the war faster, Fletcher said quietly. We could fire faster, suppress enemy positions, advance under fire. It gave us an advantage that added up across thousands of battles. Maybe that saved lives in the long run by shortening the war. Tanaka nodded slowly. Perhaps. Or perhaps we simply killed each other more efficiently. Both rifles did their job too well. Both sides fought with determination. In the end, your nation's industrial might won, but everyone lost something. Fletcher made a decision. He held out his M1 Garand to Tanaka. I want you to have this, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that weapons don't make wars, people do. And people can choose peace. Tanaka stared at the rifle for a long moment, then accepted it with both hands. He placed it next to his Arisaka rifle. Two weapons from opposite sides, now together in peace. He spoke, and Chin translated. Two rifles, two nations, two philosophies of war. Both effective at killing, neither able to bring back the dead. Let them stand here as witnesses to what was and what should never be again. Fletcher left the M1 Garand with Tanaka that day. Walking away felt strange, like leaving behind part of himself. But it also felt right. The rifle had served its purpose. The war was over. New purposes were needed now. Rebuilding, reconciliation, remembering the cost so that future generations might choose differently. Years later, Fletcher would tell people that MacArthur was right. The M1 Garand was indeed the greatest battle implement ever devised, not because it killed effectively, but because it helped end a terrible war. The rifle gave American soldiers advantages that Japanese forces could not overcome, advantages rooted in industrial production and modern tactics. But Fletcher would always add that the greatest implement of all would be one that prevented wars from starting in the first place. Until humanity created that implement, soldiers like him and Tanaka would continue to carry rifles and remember friends who never came home.